Two crimes from deep in the Appalachian Mountains that have left investigators searching for answers. Could someone watching hold the key to solving these mysteries? This is Appalachia Unsolved. Coming up later on this episode of Appalachia Unsolved, a triple murder that sent shockwaves across the hills of North Carolina and made front-page news all across America. But first, we travel to Greenville County, South Carolina, where the case of Charles Shipman has baffled police and historians to this very day. A highly respected man is found lifeless at a horrifying crime scene. The police investigation revealed disturbing events that led up to the mysterious death, and the events that happened in the days that followed only left more baffling questions with no answers. As detectives desperately tried to answer the question, was this a self-inflicted tragedy, or was it something more sinister? Nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, Taylor, South Carolina is your typical southern small community, a blue-collar town that was built at the site of a historic mineral spring that the Cherokee once called Chick Springs. For hundreds of years, natives and whites alike believed that drinking and bathing in these waters could cure a person from a variety of sicknesses. And by the late 1800s, several noted physicians had opened up a large hotel near the springs where railroads would bring in wealthy visitors from all over the country, powerful and affluent people who were looking for miracle cures in an age long before the revolutionary antibiotics and even penicillin were available. By the 1900s, the Grand Hotel could accommodate over 4,000 guests, complete with the latest technology of telephone lines in each and every room. Daily newspapers from as far away as New York or Washington could be purchased on the very evening of their publication. The hotel featured activities to amuse the wealthy: horseback riding, bowling, fox hunting, and of course, all the mineral spring water you could drink. However, this fairy tale setting of Chick Springs would soon come to a tragic end at the hands of the government. You see, officials decided to build a public road right through the resort, which included a 30-foot embankment that the engineers said would reduce flooding to the hotel and springs. But instead, in the 1920s, after a heavy rain, the embankment acted as a dam and flooded the hotel with water that was over 20 feet deep, destroying the entire property. And when the waters receded, the springs were covered in countless tons of mud and sand, ruining them forever. Just like that, all the rich businessmen and investors abandoned Chick Springs, and soon only a few rural farmers remained. Among those who were left was a man named Charles Shipman, a 65-year-old who had spent his entire life in the area. He had been born without the use of his left arm. It was said that that arm was so weak that he couldn't lift a spoon to his mouth, and because of that, Mr. Shipman had never been able to perform manual labor that most men could easily do. Instead, he worked down at the local sawmill, where he sat at a switchboard all day long watching a voltage gauge, making sure that the current didn't get too high, and if it did, his only job was to flip a switch. Truth be told, the job was so easy that even a child could have done it. But folks in the Chick Springs community, they all thought highly of Charles. After all, he had raised several kids in his younger days, and now they were all honest, hard-working men and women. That's right. To an outsider, Charles Shipman was living an ordinary life, and few suspected that anything could possibly be amiss. Yet, things aren't always what they seem, and it turns out that there was a bit of trouble brewing behind closed doors. For one, after raising 9 children together, Charles's wife, Mary, had grown tired of her husband, and by 1921, she had made him leave the house. Because of this, Charles was bouncing around, living with one child or another for a couple of months at a time. And in the present, he was living with one of his oldest daughters, named Minnie, who had married a farmer named Wiley Taylor. Minnie felt sorry for her father, and she couldn't bear to see him without a place to live, so she insisted that he stay at her place. Surely he would work things out with his wife, and this would all be a temporary situation, right? Well, anyone who's ever had the unfortunate experience of having one of their in-laws living with them knows that things don't usually go as planned. And for Wiley Taylor, the last thing he wanted in this world was his father-in-law living right under his nose in the same house with him. That's right. From the very beginning of this arrangement, it seemed doomed. And I tell you right now, no one in Chick Springs was prepared for what happens next.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling today. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller Volume 1 and 2 or the brand new book Molly's Story today.
By June of 1921, Charles Shipman had been living with his daughter and his son-in-law for nearly 4 months. And you couldn't have found 3 people that were more unhappy with the living arrangements. It seemed that Charles couldn't do anything right in Wiley's eyes, and he was constantly berating the old man. Mr. Shipman clearly didn't feel wanted in the home, and he had even made a couple of statements to his daughter that he just didn't want to go on living like this. He didn't want to be a burden on her. But things finally came to a head on June 8th, when Wiley rode into town and filed charges on his father-in-law for stealing a few items from the home. And that afternoon, the men flew into a heated argument, and Wiley told him to get out of his house and to never come back. Minnie pleaded with the two to just try and talk things over. But right there, in the presence of his wife, Wiley told the old man, "We'll finish this later. You better believe that." And a moment later, Charles Shipman grabbed his jacket and his hat and left his daughter's home. The incident seemed to be just the latest in a series of similar evictions for the old man, and many assumed that her father would just go and stay with her brother, Charles Jr., who lived just right up the road. Yet, the very next morning, Minnie went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast, and as the sun rose outside, she noticed something strange through the window over the sink. What was that? She thought as she strained her eyes, trying hard to focus on the object in the distance. There was her father, standing at the edge of the woods in the backyard. But what in the world was he doing there? Minnie promptly went out the back door and called out to him, yet he didn't respond. And as she approached, a grim reality began to set in. There was her father's hat on the ground beside him, and his shoes, oh my God, his shoes weren't touching the ground. Charles Shipman was hanging by a rope from the cedar tree. Police were immediately called to the scene, and an investigation promptly began. The circumstances at the crime scene were curious. How could a one-armed man hang himself? And there on the ground was Mr. Shipman's hat, coat, and his walking stick. And the pants that he was wearing were torn and had dirt and leaves all over him. It appeared to detectives that he had been rolling on the ground. What really had happened here? Investigators began questioning Wiley Taylor, whose story was a bit shaky. At first, he stated that the old man had simply left the house on his own. But after Winnie told detectives about the argument between the two men, Wiley changed his story and admitted that he asked the man to leave. But he had seen his father-in-law later that night, and he even asked him to come back. But none of this made any sense to authorities. So, with nothing more than suspicion, both Wiley and Minnie Taylor were placed under the arrest for the murder of Charles Shipman. But was it murder? A grand jury was called, and several witnesses testified that Mr. Shipman had made statements suggesting that he might harm himself. Others testified that Shipman had confided that he feared Wiley Taylor. Even the foreman at Shipman's employer took the stand and stated that it would have been impossible for Charles Shipman to have tied that rope. Evidence from the crime scene was sent to Clemson University for analysis, and it was determined that Charles wasn't under the influence and that he hadn't been poisoned. And in a letter addressed to the court, researchers at the university stated that it was their official opinion that someone other than Charles Shipman had committed this crime. Did Charles Shipman take his own life, or was he murdered by his son-in-law? And if so, was Mr. Shipman's daughter covering up her husband's secret? Neither Minnie or Wiley would reveal any additional details about what really happened in the hours prior to the discovery of the crime scene. And even though the grand jury concluded that someone other than Charles Shipman committed this crime, investigators were forced to release Wiley and Minnie Taylor due to lack of evidence. One final twist in this story is that despite both the grand jury and Clemson University finding that this was indeed a homicide, the official death certificate states that Mr. Shipman was responsible for his own demise. What about you, my friend? What do you think really happened? Coming up next on Appalachia Unsolved, a shocking triple murder leaves detectives in the mountains of North Carolina searching for answers in one of the most diabolical crimes to ever take place. A mysterious triple murder rocks a small mountain town. The police investigation reveals disturbing hidden secrets from the victim's past. How were all the victims connected? Was this a crime of opportunity, a professional mafia hit, or even more chilling, was this a case of voodoo black magic gone terribly wrong? Henderson County, North Carolina, is nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, a place where friendly folks and small-town charm were the norm. Summer tourists flock to the area for its legendary clean mountain air and the breathtaking scenic views. But above all, this community of 30,000 people has always been the type of place where everyone knew everybody, and folks never thought twice about their kids' safety. For Vernon Shipman, he had grown up and graduated high school here. And by the time he was an adult, his roots were firmly planted here. And for the past 16 years, he was a career man working for the government down at the employment office. Now Vernon was a steady fella and dependable too, a likable guy who everyone knew. The bachelor shared his modest home with his elderly father. Friends said that Vernon loved to cook, especially on Sundays, where he would frequently invite as many as 20 people over to socialize and spend the day listening to his record collection. Now, Hendersonville was also home to a man named Charles Glass. Charles had spent his 20s trying to make it as a professional musician, and he traveled up and down the East Coast, opening up for well-known rhythm and blues singers. The aspiring musician even cut a 45 record called Screamin' and Dyin' that was released nationally and even received critical acclaim from several music magazines. Now, although he would eventually move to Hendersonville and abandon his dreams of becoming famous, music remained his first love, and he was known to decorate his apartment with album covers of his musical idols. So you see, it was a mutual love of music that brought Vernon and Charles together. By 1966, the two men had become the closest of friends. They shared many of the same dreams, and soon they even became business partners. At first, they tried their hand at starting a restaurant that featured some of Vernon's home cooking. Yet, because of his career at the employment office, Vernon was only able to devote weekends to the restaurant, and eventually it closed. Undeterred, the partners went back to the drawing board, determined to open another business. And soon they did. This time, they opened a music store named Tempo Records. Oh, it was an instant success with all the youth in the area, since this store specialized in rock and roll records. While Vernon owned the store, he continued working for the government. But for Charles, the store was a natural fit, especially with his background in the industry. By all accounts, Vernon Shipman and Charles Glass were well respected in the community and had even proven that they were strict businessmen running their successful record store. They had no known enemies and were very active in the community. But there was more to know about these two men, and perhaps even some dark secrets. But one thing was certain. Soon, the unexplained events surrounding the shocking deaths of both of these men would rock all of western North Carolina and resulted in every state and federal investigative agency scouring the area looking for any possible clues to the crime. And what they discovered would soon explode as the most sensational murder mystery of 1966. The mystery surrounding Vernon Shipman and Charles Glass began to unfold on July 18, 1966, when strangely, Vernon didn't show up for work at his office, and Charles failed to open the record store that day. Both men had disappeared. Vernon's father contacted investigators when he noted that he hadn't seen his son during the past 48 hours, and this was highly unlike him, especially since he always came home several times a day to tend to his two dogs. Police soon discovered that both men had been spotted on the previous day shopping down at an antique store around lunch, and later on that afternoon, several witnesses saw the pair riding down a country road in Vernon's 1962 Ford Fairlane. They also noted that there appeared to be multiple people in the back seat of the car with them. And sure enough, 2 days later, police found Vernon's car abandoned on a dirt road near railroad tracks. But there were no sign of the men. And even more odd, police also found a different 1962 Ford Fairlane, also abandoned just a few miles away on the banks of the French Broad River, with a woman's purse hanging on the door handle. And both cars still had the keys in the ignition. Inside the purse, detectives found a driver's license for a 61-year-old woman named Louise Shoemate. Interestingly, the address on her license didn't actually exist at all. And soon, detectives learned that she was really living in a small apartment where she too had been reported missing. And upon searching her apartment, investigators discovered that there wasn't a single piece of furniture inside, not even a picture on the wall. In fact, it didn't appear that anyone had ever lived there. What was going on here? Suddenly, police were searching for 3 people. Was it possible that the 2 cases were connected? After all, there was no evidence that Louise and the 2 men even knew each other. Days went by and nothing. What investigators needed was a break in the case. That break finally came on the morning of July 22nd, when 2 men were hauling a load of brush to a local dump. And as the men unloaded the truck, one of them noticed something unusual in the distance. "Jim, what's that over there?" Both men began walking through the tall grass towards what appeared to be mannequins laying on the ground. Perhaps some local store had thrown them away. But as they got closer, a horrific scene unfolded before their eyes. There before them were 3 bodies, purposely arranged in a semicircle. They had been there for days in the summer heat, and all 3 victims had been bludgeoned to death with a car jack and stabbed repeatedly with what appeared to be an ice pick. The position of the bodies was disturbing. One man had a large chunk of scrap iron laid across his neck. The second man had a pair of crutches laid across his chest in the shape of a cross. And the woman had the car jack that had been used in the crime shoved partially inside of her body. Vernon Shipman, Charles Glass, and Louise Shumate had been found. And as gruesome as the crime scene was, nobody was prepared for what happened next. The chilling discovery ignited a murder investigation that left 4 law enforcement agencies and a private detective utterly confounded, while stirring up a storm of speculation among the wagging tongues. And despite rewards being offered, and one of the most thorough and determined manhunts ever to take place in the Appalachian Mountains, the case would remain just as mysterious today as the day it happened, with more questions than answers. Police began digging into the backgrounds of the victims. Louise had graduated with a nursing degree, although she had never worked a day as a nurse, and instead had worked on and off in department stores and factories. And even more strange, police discovered large amounts of cash in a safe deposit box in her name after her death. Much more money than someone with her job could have ever amassed. And then there was Charles Glass. It was soon discovered that he had a secret obsession with voodoo. In fact, he had written a book on voodoo spells and curses. And unbeknownst to his business partner, he was selling black magic charms, teas, and spells out the back door of the record shop. Police were stumped for answers, and soon weeks turned into months, and then years, and now decades. The cold case remains an unsolved mystery. Over the years, several theories have emerged. Initially, police focused their investigation on a man named Edward Thompson, a local career criminal who had been in and out of prison for assault, robbery, and even murder. Yet, no evidence could connect him to the crime. Was robbery the motive? Both men's wallets were found empty at the scene. But if that's the case, why was Louise's purse left untouched? Was it just a coincidence that both cars in this crime were 1962 Ford Fairlanes? Some even speculate that it was actually a mafia hit that had more to do with Louise's secret past and the large amounts of money that she had. Is it possible that Vernon and Charles were accidentally caught up in this crime due to the likeness of their cars? Or was it something far more sinister? Could Charles's secret life of voodoo had something to do with the staging of the bodies in the circle, and the sadistic treatments of the corpses, and the placement of the makeshift cross across the victim's chest? Will we ever truly know what happened? What about you, my friend? What do you think really happened? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.